Hilchos Temurah Perek Revi, the laws of forbidden exchange, chapter 4. Interestingly enough, most of this chapter is not about Temurah. It's not about forbidden exchange. Instead, what is it about? It's about what do we do with a baby of a sacrifice. That means if you have an animal that was put aside to be offered as a sacrifice, and before you had a chance to bring it, it became pregnant, and it had a child, what is the law of that child? There's considerable discussion as to why this chapter is in the laws of exchange. The technical reason seems to be because all the laws that apply to children of sacrifices also apply to children of exchanges of sacrifices. That means if you did Temurah to a sacrifice, whatever would happen to the child of the sacrifice would also happen to the child of the Temurah, as we're going to see. Another possible interpretation could be that it's an introduction to what's coming at the end of the chapter. At the very end of the chapter, the Rambam is going to discuss the other mitzvah related to Temurah, which is called a different type of exchange. Not where you exchange one animal for another, but where you exchange within one animal, you try to change its holiness from a burnt offering to a peace offering. And in order to truly appreciate that, we have to also know what happens to a baby of a sacrifice. And once you establish what kind of holiness the babies of sacrifices have, now we can introduce the mitzvah of not exchanging one type of holiness to another after you know all the types of holinesses. On a different level, it's also the last chapter dealing with sacrificial things. Starting tomorrow, we're moving into a new book, a long project, but a whole different subject, purity and impurity. This is really the end of these last two books, which have been dealing with the temple service and all things sacrifice related. So the Rambam kind of puts it in here. It's technically related to Temurah also, but it's somewhat of a concluding chapter related to all sacrificial things. These are some insights, but there's other answers, I'm sure, and if anybody online watching has some kind of an insight here, I'd love to hear it. With that, we're going to get right to the chapter. It says that Rambam Halacha Aleph, Ketzad Din Valdeis HaKadashim. What is the law of babies of animals that were put aside to be sacrifices? Now understand something, that if your sacrifice is becoming pregnant and having a child, that means that by default you already did something wrong. What is that wrong thing that you did? You've been delaying bringing your sacrifice. Right? Ideally, you make a consecration or a dedication, you're supposed to go to the temple right away, or at least by the next holiday. How did it even have time to have a child? So we're going to see that's going to play in to some of the laws related to the babies, in that you should have taken into account the fact that you need to bring the sacrifice, not just have it hang around to have children. But at any rate, we're going to discuss what are the laws if there is a child born. We begin with the shlamim, the peace offering. Says the Rambam, Vlad shlamim and Vlad Temurah shlamim. Both the baby of an animal dedicated for a peace offering and the baby of an animal that was exchanged for an animal that's supposed to be a peace offering, Hare elu kashlamim, they are treated like peace offerings, vehem atzmam kishlamim l'chol davar, and they are also fully, in terms of their offering procedure, fully treated like a peace offering. As we learned yesterday, some of the details are they have to have smicha, they have to be leaned on, they require nesachim, they have to be brought with libations, they have to have the special procedure of waving the chaz of a sheikh, the breast and the foreleg. All unique things that apply to shlamim also apply to the babies and babies of exchanges of shlamim. V'chein, so too, vlad hatoida, uvlad temurah, or some more exact texts have temurah sa, the baby of a thanksgiving offering, and the baby of an animal that was exchanged for a thanksgiving offering. Both of these babies, hare elu yikrivu katoida, they should be offered in the same way that a thanksgiving offering is sacrificed, ela she'einam tunim lechem, with the exception of not requiring bread. Like we had yesterday with the Temurah of a Taida, only a thanksgiving offering itself is offered with bread. She'ein mevin lechem eloyim atoida atzma. Here the Rambam gives the source. We only bring bread with a thanksgiving offering, the original one. Shenemar, as it says, the verse that introduces the bread obligation, it says you should offer it al zevach hatoida, on or together with the thanksgiving sacrifice. Why does it repeat that word? Al zevach hatoida. That means alav v'lei al vlada v'lei al temurasa kamesha b'yarnu. Only for it, accompanying it, do you bring the bread, not accompanying its baby, or the baby of its exchange, or the baby of its exchange. Kamesha b'yarnu, as we explained yesterday and just now. Bamed varim amurim, says the Rambam. When do we say this? That the babies are treated like the shlamim, like the taida, bivlades atzmam, the babies themselves. Aval valde vlades einam krevim. But if there's grandkids, we're not going to let you offer them like a thanksgiving offering or like a peace offering. Why? Why do you have grandkids of a sacrifice? Clearly from your actions, the fact that you delayed your sacrifice so long, allowing it to produce a generation and another generation, clearly you can see that you're delaying them, you're keeping them in your flock to grow flocks from it. It seems like you're trying to trick hektish. You want to get away with giving one sacrifice and not two. You want to have children in the meantime. Therefore, we find him, we don't even allow him to offer it. Because if you think about it, offering it as a peace offering or Thanksgiving offering, it sounds like a fine, but it's not fully a fine. Because the owners get to have a piece of the Thanksgiving and peace offerings. So the Rambam says if you allowed your shlamim or its exchange or the babies to have babies, those were not going to let you offer them at all. Instead, what do? The Rambam doesn't say. There are two opinions. Some understand the Rambam that it means that you have to leave them to graze, like we have in many other cases of disqualified sacrifices. You leave it to graze till it gets a blemish, then you have to exchange it. Others say, even more tragically, they have to let them die. That's the full penalty. You don't get to have any sort of benefit from it. As we're going to see in a moment when it comes to the chatas, in some cases animals are consigned to die. This would be a case that these animals have to be left to die. Halacha beis, we move on to the next category of offering, vlad hachatas, the baby of a sin offering. Sin offering is brought as a female in many cases, so it could have a baby. Yamos, the baby needs to be consigned to die. Ve'ein sarich leimar vlad temurah, needless to say, the baby of its exchange also is left to die. Halacha gimel, but this law of the baby of a chatas being consigned to die is only if the baby was already born. However, hasheichet asachatas, if somebody slaughters the mom, the sin offering, umatzaba ben arba achai, and he finds in it a 4-month-old fetus still alive. Some texts have ben shmeina, 8-month-old, which is a little hard to understand because gestation for these animals isn't really 8 to 9 months. But the point is, it was a fetus that wasn't born yet. It's still inside the mom. Harezu ne'echeles, it may be eaten. It may be eaten because it still hasn't assumed its own identity. It's not the baby of a chatas. It's part of its mom. Now it has to be eaten kibsar hachatas, with the same level of holiness as the mom, like meat of a sin offering. But it could be eaten. Shavalde hakadashim bim imam him kedashim, because babies of sacrifices become holy in their mom's stomach. We're going to see a contrast to this at the end of the chapter with the firstborn. Firstborn only becomes holy once it leaves. Babies of other sacrifices become holy in utero. And that's why you're allowed to eat it, but it has to be eaten like the meat of a karban chatas. Were it to be born fully, it would be a vlad chatas and have to leave left to die. In the mom, it could still be eaten. Halacha daled, we move on to the next type of sacrifice. Vlad tmuras ha'asham, the baby of an animal used in exchange for a guilt offering. Uvlad vlada ad soifa ilam, and also if there's grandkids, babies upon babies, yiru ad sheyipel bahem mum, they're left to graze till they get a blemish, v'yimachru, then they're sold, v'yiplu dmeam lindava, and their money will go to voluntary offerings. The Rambam will soon explain what this means. Notice the Rambam over here did not begin with Vlad Asham, talking about the baby of the Asham itself. And of course the reason for that is because an Asham in its core state can only be a male. It can't give birth. The only case you could have is if you have an exchange, you try to exchange a female for that male, and this female had a baby. Then it has the din of Yipel Behem Mum. B'im Yolda Zachar Achar Shehikri Vashamai. If, however, the exchange of the asham, which was a female, gave birth to a male after you already sacrificed the original guilt offering, the male guilt offering which you had put aside, havlad atzma yikrav oila. The baby itself should not be left to graze. Instead, it should be brought as a burnt offering. Hiftish nekeva la'ashamai v'yolda. What if you put aside, mistakenly or purposely, the wrong animal for the guilt offering? Guilt offering is supposed to be male. You put aside a female and it gave birth. Tira hiuvna ad sheipel b'hen mum. So the same law applies. It and its son go to graze till they get a blemish, v'yimachra, then they're sold, v'yavi b'dmei shnehem ashamai, and you use together the mom and the baby to bring your original guilt offering. V'yim kvar hikriv ashamai, and if you already found another animal to offer as your guilt offering, yiplu dmei lindava, then the money, the proceeds from the sale of these two animals should go to nidava, to the voluntary offerings, which we'll explain again in a moment. Halacha hey, the next type of sacrifice, vlad tmuras ha'oila, the baby of an exchange of a burnt offering. Again, the Rambam doesn't go with vlad ha'oila itself because an oila has to be a male. So the only case you can have is if you have a baby of the exchange animal that you put instead of the burnt offering. Vlad vlada ad soif ha'ilam, and the babies of its babies all the way till the end of time. Hare'elu ka'oila v'heim atzmam yikriv oila. They are treated like a burnt offering. They themselves must be offered as a burnt offering. Hifrish nekeva lo ilasa v'yalda. If mistakenly or purposely you put aside the wrong animal, a female, for your burnt offering and it gave birth, afal pisha yalda zachar, even though it gave birth to a male, which could be offered as an oila, yirad sheyipel beimum v'yavi b'dam avela. You instead don't offer it. You wait till it gets a blemish and then you sell it, and with the proceeds you bring a burnt offering. Now we keep on using the word lindava. The money goes to the donation, voluntary sacrifices. What does that mean? The Rambam reminds us, we already explained in the laws of sacrificial procedures, wherever we use the term, that the money should go to the voluntary offerings. That means, you should put the money into the special boxes that were in the Holy Temple, which we explained in the laws of the half shekel, how many boxes there were. There were 13 boxes, 6 of them were involved for these voluntary offerings. And you put the money in there. The court would take all that money and offer just continuous burnt offerings. Specifically, it was when the altar had a not busy day. Just to keep the altar busy, they would bring these burnt offerings. In Yossi Mishal Tzibur, the libations was sponsored by the communal coffers. The Einon Tu'unes Smicha, they don't require leaning because there's no particular owner who's bringing the sacrifice. Aval Mokem Shenemar, but any place that we said, Hu Atzma Yikrav Oila, it itself needs to be offered as a burnt offering. Ayavi b'dam of oila, or we use the term with the money you bring a burnt offering. We didn't say you give it to the voluntary offerings. You yourself have to bring it as a burnt offering, then it's your responsibility. Therefore it requires leaning, because it's your personal sacrifice, and the libations have to come from your own pocket. Halacha vav, next category of sacrifice, vlad hamaiser, uvlad tmuras hamaiser. A baby of an animal tithe, or a baby of an animal that was exchanged for the animal tithe. Vlad tmuras habcher, also the baby of an exchange for a b'cher. You can't say the baby of a b'cher itself, because a b'cher is a firstborn male. But if there's an exchange for a firstborn that you tried to make, uvalde valde seyam ad soifa ilam, and the babies of their babies till the end of time, hare elu la yikrivu, we don't offer these babies. Elo yiru at sheyipol bahem mum, they must graze till they get a blemish. V'ye'achlu kab'cher v'kamaiser shenafal bahem mum, and they should be eaten just like any regular firstborn or animal tithe that would be eaten when it gets a blemish. And who gets the animals? Valdes tmuras hab'cher lakayin, the babies of the exchange for the firstborn go to the kohen like the regular b'cher. Valdes maiseru tmurase lebaylav, and the babies of the animal tithe, or the babies of the exchange of the animal tithe, go to the owners like animal tithes typically go. Halacha zayin. The final type of offering we're going to discuss, Vlad Tmuras HaPesach, the baby of the exchange of the Passover offering. Again, we can't say the baby of the Passover offering itself. Passover offering is a male. But if you try to exchange it for a female, then the halacha is it's Kitmuras HaPesach, just like the same laws as the exchange of the Karban Pesach. And we remember from yesterday that it depends when you did the exchange. If you did the exchange before midday of the 14th, before the obligation devolved, since it's not definitive whether the animal is going to be a Passover offering or could potentially be switched out to a peace offering, therefore, when you exchange it, you can't offer the exchange. You have to wait till it gets a blemish and then sell it, and then you bring a peace offering. But if the exchange was done after midday, and it already became a definite Karban Pesach, then the exchange has to be offered as a Karban Shlamim. So the baby of the exchange goes the same way. If it was a case where the mom would be offered as a Shlamim, that's the second case I mentioned before, where you did the exchange after midday, Vlada Yikraf Shlamim, so the baby also is offered as a peace offering. If the law was that you sell it, because you did the exchange before midday, so you must sell it and then bring with the money a peace offering, also the baby must be sold, and you bring with the money, you bring a peace offering. What if you mistakenly or purposely put aside a female animal for the Karban Pesach, which you weren't supposed to do, but you have now a female. V'yolda, and it gave birth. Or you separated it while it was pregnant. So, hopefully, you're going to have time before Pesach for the animal to be born. So it and its baby will graze until they get a blemish, v'yavi b'dmei and Pesach, and you'll use the money to actually buy a proper Passover offering. But if the female stayed till after Passover, or it only gave birth after Passover, and you already had to bring the Passover offering earlier, so now what do you do with this animal? You let the baby and the mom graze till they get a blemish, and they're going to bring a peace offering with their proceeds, as you would do in any case of an exchanged Karban Pesach. Halacha ches, this is more of a general rule. Valdes hakadashim sheyatzu derech doifen. Babies of an animal put aside for sacrifice that emerged by C-section. They weren't born naturally. Oisha yoldu tumtum, or if the sacrificial animal gave birth to a tumtum, an animal whose genitalia is covered, you don't know if it's male or female. Vandregenes, or a hermaphrodite. Vikilayim, or gave birth to a hybrid, utrefa, or a mortally wounded animal. All these animals cannot be offered as sacrifices. So therefore, they have to be redeemed, and with the money you bring, karban haroi lehavi bidmei vlad shelzu. Whatever sacrifice was supposed to be brought with the baby of such a sacrifice, so in this case you can't offer it, so you bring with the money whatever sacrifice you're supposed to bring had it been a regular baby. Halacha tes vlad balas mum. What if an animal has a blemish? so it's not going to be offered as a sacrifice, then it has a baby. That doesn't stop the baby from having its laws. It becomes considered like a baby of an unblemished animal for every matter. It has to be offered in the proper way. If a sacrificial animal gave birth or miscarried a fetus or a placenta, that fetus or that placenta is holy. They have to be buried, and they cannot have any benefit derived from them. And that covers all the laws of all types of babies, of all types of sacrifices. And now that Rambam concludes with dealing with the final mitzvah of this set of laws. If somebody tries to change a holy animal from one category of holiness to another category, he transgresses a negative commandment. We learned this from the firstborn offering. Firstborn offering is essentially holy. It's born holy. And what does it say? Lo yakdish ish oisai. No man shall consecrate it. What does that mean? It's already holy. The meaning is, since it's already holy, don't try to sanctify it with a different type of holiness. Don't make it into a burnt offering or a peace offering. And from there we learn to all types of sacrifices. You cannot exchange them from one holiness to another holiness. And fascinatingly, this applies whether these are animals that were consecrated to actually be offered on the altar, or they were put aside not to be offered on the altar, but to be used for money for the temple treasury. You also cannot change from one cause to another. Ketzad, what does this mean? If you consecrated an animal to be used for the upkeep of the heichal structure, you cannot change it and now use the funds for taking care of the altar. The same applies in all similar cases. Whatever the money was given for, that's what it has to be used for. We're not going to get lashes for this prohibition, but it nevertheless is a prohibition, and many authorities say that this applies even today. If a donor gives tzedakah to a given cause, you don't have the right to change it for another cause. Whatever he gave it to, that's what it has to be used for. Halacha Yud Bey is talking about the idea that a bechor is born holy, and its consecration cannot be changed to a different category of sacrifice. That Rambam gives one option of a way that you could do that. Ketzad ma'arimin al habcher, how may one conduct a trick with a firstborn animal, lahakdishe lemizbeach hekdesh acher, to allow it to be consecrated to the altar in a different way. There is a way out. There is a way to make, if you know you have a bechor coming, you can exchange the holiness of the firstborn to a different type of sacrifice. How do you do that? Makdishe babeten kodim sheyivalid. What you do is you sanctify it while it's still in the mom's stomach before it's born. Because even though we said before in the beginning of the chapter that babies of sacrifices become holy in utero, not so by a bechor. It says in the Torah clearly, shenemar, it says asher yevukar laHashem bivehema, an animal that's born first. Then lo yakdish ish oisai, nobody can consecrate it for something else. That means misha yevukar yato magdisha. Once it's born, you can't sanctify it. Avalato magdisha babeten, but you can sanctify it in utero. Lefikach, therefore, yesh leimar. The person can say, masha b'me'eha shel mevakera zu. I know now my animal is pregnant for the first time. It's going to have its first child. I don't know if it's a male or a female, but if it's a male, whatever is in the stomach of this first time mom, im hu zachar, if it's going to be a male, harezu oila, I want it to be a burnt offering, not a bechor, and then it will be a burnt offering. However, that's the only thing you can change it to, a burnt offering, not to a peace offering. Why? Because a bechor is more holy than a peace offering in the sense that you as the owner won't get any benefit from it. It's all going to the Kohen. If you're going to make it into a peace offering, that means you're getting more benefit. And that you can't do. You cannot revoke its holiness with a cause to give you benefit. You can revoke its holiness to give God more benefit, but not yourself more benefit. V'im Amar says that Rambam, this law only applies totally before it's born. If you said this in Yitzias Reiv Reishai, once the baby has crowned, most of its head is out of the mom, then you say it should be a burnt offering. That's the firstborn. Not an Eila, you lost the chance. Halacha Yud Gimel, this exception only applies to firstborns. We cannot make a trick with other holy animals, lahakdish ubara kedusha acheres, to make its fetus holy with a different type of sanctity. Elaharehu ki kedushas ima, it carries the holiness of its mom. Shevaldes hakadashim mimei imamhim kedashim kamesha be'arnu, because the babies of sacrifices are holy in utero of their mom, as we explained. And therefore every fetus is carrying the holiness of its mom. You cannot change it in utero like you did with the firstborn, because the bechor only becomes holy once it emerges. So before it emerges, you can change the holiness. And now the Rambam concludes this set of laws, and indeed this entire book, with an ethical perspective, as he usually does. And this piece of Rambam probably was quoted by the Rebbe hundreds of times. There's immense amount of commentary. We're going to just deliver one element of the Rebbe's approach to this final halacha. What does the Rambam say over here? We're going to read a little bit and then do some commentary. Afal pi shekol chukei haTorah gzeires heim. Even though all the chukim, all the statutes in the Torah are decrees of Hashem, as we explained in the end of the last book, there's mitzvahs that are mishpatim, that we understand their reason, and there's mitzvahs that are chukim. Chukim means we don't have the reason. We don't know the reason. And the Rambam explained at the end of the last book, very, very carefully warning us, just because you don't understand something doesn't mean you treat it lightly. At any rate, we see that there's chukim that are gzeiros, they're decrees of Hashem. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, that doesn't excuse you from trying to understand them. Royally hisbainin bahem, it is actually fitting to contemplate them. Any element of a mitzvah which you are able to give it a reason, you should give it a reason. Even mystically, this means that every single halacha in Torah has to be a hirah, has to be a lesson for us. We have to do it. By the way, in the last book, that Rambam Taka only mentioned about the fact that you should treat it with complete obedience and not try to understand it. But the Rebbe notes that that might be because the name of the last book was avodah, service. When you're a servant, when you're a slave, you don't look for answers, you don't look for explanations. This book is called karbanis, sacrifices. The word karban means kiruv, becoming close to God. If I want to be more close to God, I have to find more significance and meaning in the rituals that I do. And therefore, in the last book, that Rambam more encouraged the element of not understanding. In this book, that Rambam encourages the element of yes, understanding. By the way, even in the last book, that Rambam alluded to the fact that chukim have a reason. He used the words ein taiman yodua. Their reason is not known, which means they have a reason, it's just not known. Here in this book, that Rambam implores us to find that reason, to dig out even an element, any element of a mitzvah which you could understand, you must try to understand. And the Rambam then adds what we call Maisarav. He adds proof that this has been done. Our early sages told us, Shahamelech Shleimer, that King Solomon himself, Havin Roiv Hataimim, Shel Kol Chukei HaTorah. He understood most of the reasons of all of the statutes of the Torah. So, if Shleimer HaMelech did it, it means that everybody can do it. And everybody, right, that's atoyachal. You see the Rambam's language? Atoyachal iten leitam. If you're able to give it a reason, you have to give it a reason. I know you're able to give it a reason because King Solomon did it. Therefore, it behooves every single person to find those reasons. And on this note, the Rambam's going to give reasons for the mitzvah of Temurah, which we're discussing in this set of halachas. But before we get to that, let's discuss a little bit this premise. The Rambam is saying there's an obligation on every single person to try to understand those things that are beyond his understanding. Now, we know, and this is brought in many other works of Jewish philosophy and mysticism, that mitzvahs that you understand, how they bring benefit, or how not doing them brings benefit, you're supposed to approach them and say, efshi. I don't want them. I understand them logically, and therefore I don't want to do these averas. But an avera which is beyond understanding, you're actually supposed to say, the proper Jewish approach is to say, I don't understand them, therefore I want to do the sin. I only don't do the sin because my Father in heaven decreed it upon me. In other words, there's an element of approaching a chayk by saying, I don't understand it. But if what the Rambam is saying is true, that we have to understand it, there's now a contradiction. If I can't understand it, so how can I try to understand it? If I could try to understand it, then why would I say efshi? Why would I say I want to do the sin? Maybe if you would probe the depths, you would understand that, and you wouldn't want to do the sin. And even the proof that he brings from King Solomon is not a good proof. Because King Solomon was the wisest of all men. Maybe that's like a king's close minister. He reveals his intentions and his reasons to him. But everybody else is supposed to stay on the regular path and not try to understand things. So the Rebbe explains a wonderful concept. And he says, no. Mishpatim and chukim, both types of mitzvahs have reasons. But there's a very fundamental difference between the types of reasons. The reasons for mishpatim are such reasons that God allowed the human mind to come to them on their own. Human logic dictates that this should be the case. When it comes to chukim, even though there are reasons, they're godly reasons. They're divine reasons. They're reasons that you have to put on Torah's glasses to appreciate. Once you have the Torah, we can also find meaning in it. But without the Torah, we wouldn't come to it on our own. And therefore, the Rambam says this point specifically by Temurah. Because watch, we're going to look at the reasons that the Rambam gives, and we're going to see how they're not humanly logical reasons, they're Torah logical reasons. Let's read it inside and let's see what this means. Yerah Eli, says the Rambam, it seems to me, the fact that Torah says when it comes to exchange, that we penalize the person, and both the original animal and the exchange become holy, what's the reason for that? It's very similar to another mitzvah. It resembles what Torah says elsewhere, that if somebody consecrates his home to Hashem, and then he wants to buy it back, he has to add a fifth to the principal. What's the reasoning over there? Why would you say a person has to add money to buy his own house back? So the Rambam tells us the reason over there is Yarda Torah l'seif machshavas ha'adam uktzas yitzrei hara. Torah goes down to the end of human thought and takes into account a little bit of his evil inclination. What is human nature, says the Rambam? It's a person's nature to lean towards having more possessions and to have mercy on his money. A person loves to keep his belongings safe and protected. So, even though it's true, he already made the vow, he already consecrated his home, it's very possible that he retracted. He regrets what he did. And if you're just going to allow him to buy it back at its worth, you know what he's going to do? He's going to get it appraised in a cheap way. And he's going to redeem it at less than it's worth. Because he wants to just get out of it. He wants to find a cheap way to buy it back. Amra Torah, therefore Torah steps in and says, if you're redeeming it for yourself, you have to add a fifth. That's the Rambam's reason for the Chaimish. And based on this, the Rambam gives a reason for Temurah. Same way when it comes to houses, same with animals. You just sanctified an animal in a way where its body became holy. Maybe you're going to be retracting. You know what? I don't want to make the animal holy anymore. And you're going to tell me that I can't redeem it, I can't buy it back. So fine, I'll exchange it. Once I find out that I can't redeem it, I'm going to exchange it for an animal that's lesser quality. Even if all you give is permission to exchange bad animals for better animals, he'll find a way. He'll exchange a good animal for a bad animal, and he'll say it's good. Therefore, Torah puts up a blockade, and it says you cannot exchange the animals. And it fines him if he exchanges it. And it tells him that it and its exchange will be holy, thereby basically making your exchange useless. All of these things, if so, are to subdue his evil inclination and to fix his mindset. So here the Rambam gives us these two reasons. Going back to the point that I'm saying, these are Torah reasons. They're not humanly logical reasons. Why? Let's go for the first one. The Rambam is saying you're going to buy your home back at less than it's worth. You know how many laws there are in buying your home back? You have to get it appraised by 3 individuals. There's an auction, typically. You have to outbid everybody. At most 99% of the time, the home is going to be bought back for higher than its value. This one case where you're going to redeem it for cheaper than its value, if you avoid and you get loopholes around all the bureaucratic Torah red tape, it's never going to happen. Not a humanly logical reason. People wouldn't come to this on their own. This is a Torah reason. You have to have a godly, divinely inspired reason. Same with Temurah. The person already gave up the sacrifice. He forced his Yetzer Hara into donating an animal to God. Why would he retract? And not just retract all the way to become a liar. He's going to exchange a good animal for a bad animal and say that it's good. Doesn't make sense. That's right. Doesn't make sense humanly. But on Torah's glasses, when Hashem, who created the human nature and knows how far human nature can go and it can swing from one end to the other, even to lying, once Torah reveals that, now we can acknowledge that that's the truth. And that's the type of reasons that the Rambam is telling us to find. He's telling us to find reasons, not the ones that we would come to them on their own. Look into the divinely inspired Torah and see if you can find over there some kind of meaning. Now, that isn't the end of the story. There's more to the story. Why? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't smell right. If a mitzvah is a chayk, if a mitzvah is supposed to be done with commitment beyond understanding, doesn't looking for reasons mitigate the kabbalat ol, the accepting of the yoke of heaven while doing it? it kind of cheapens it if you're going to find some kind of meaning. So here the Rebbe explains a wonderful concept. The Rambam writes in Moreh Nevuchim that even the mitzvahs that are logical, even the mishpatim, once you get into the nitty-gritty details, there are no reasons. There's millions of details in every law, even the sensible laws, that make no sense. And with chukim, where you have the laws that don't make sense to begin with, there are little smidgets and parts that do make sense. So what's the difference between mishpatim and chukim? Mishpatim is a mitzvah where the logic of the mitzvah overpowers the small non-understandings. And with the chukim, it's the overpowering commitment over the smaller reasons. In other words, even the reasons that you'll find won't interfere with the general Kabbalas Ol that's required for the mitzvah. There are two different elements of the mitzvah. The Kabbalas Ol will be for the generality of the mitzvah, and the chukim will be, and the reasons will be for the small parts of the mitzvah. Which explains fascinatingly, if I could take you back to the language of the Rambam when it comes to Shlomo HaMelech. Look what he says. Shlomo HaMelech understood, Roiv HaTaimim shel kol chukei HaTorah. Most of the reasons of all the statutes. Now, everyone knows, as a kid, we always heard that Parah Aduma, the red heifer, was the one mitzvah that even King Solomon didn't understand. Here the Rambam says he understood reasons for all the chukim. What does that mean? That means that yes, Shlomo HaMelech understood, even in Parah Aduma, certain parts. He didn't get the generality of the mitzvah, fine. But certain elements he did. Roiv HaTaimim, the majority of reasons for all the chukim. He uses the word roiv also. Roiv doesn't just mean in Parah Aduma itself, it means across the board. He understood most of the reasons. Not everything. There was always something left, even for King Solomon to understand, in which he could express his Kabbalas Ol. And this is so important, this idea of this fusion and this harmony in mitzvahs, to have some parts that make sense, some parts that don't make sense, because they allow each part to enhance the other. When you do Kabbalas Ol, when you're just doing what God wants, you should also do what God wants with energy. An energy in commitment. That's making Kabbalas Ol with chayas. And also the other way, that even when you do understand something, you should appreciate that what I understand is what my little pea brain could understand. But the truest wisdom of all is the wisdom of Hashem himself. And that's the point that the Rambam is making, this fusion, that we have to find the reasons, still acknowledge the commitment, because both are true and both need to be. Before we go on and finish the last few lines, on a Hasidic level, the Rebbe explained the reasons over here for both things. The idea of regretting donating your house and then wanting to buy it back for less, and the Gzeira of Temurah. There's a letter where somebody wrote to the Rebbe, how come so many Hasidim love to have a tzaddik involved in their prayers? They're always saying, we hope that we do things like the Rebbe wants, like the tzaddik wants. Why? Like Hashem wants. Why the tzaddik? And the Rebbe explained it based on this Rambam, that a person on his own, if he tries to daven or tries to work hard, or tries to better himself, if you're dealing with your own perspective, there's always some kind of bias. And when the going gets tough, you'll find a way to slip out of it. By hanging your hat on a tzaddik, who we know is unbiased and is totally devoted to God, you make sure that you're never going to have this personal bias to get you out of things. You're not going to cut corners, you're not going to skip, because you know that you're relying on this tzaddik who's completely and with no ulterior motives devoted to Hashem. And with Temurah, that Rebbe spoke about the idea of your divine mission. Some people say, you know what, these simple things are not for me. I want to learn the deep stuff in Kabbalah and stay involved in higher things. Or some say the opposite. I don't want to be involved in higher things. It's too much beyond me, it's too sublime, too transcendent. Let me just focus on what I can understand and what I can do. Temurah says no. If this is your mission, there's no switching. Even if it's truly something better. Certainly if it's only up to your brain. You don't know what your brain can come up with. It's switching your mission. You're created for a purpose. Embrace your purpose. Don't try to run away from the destiny that God has in mind for you. And the Rambam concludes by saying that this concept applies to almost all mitzvahs. V'roiv dinei haTorah, most of the laws of the Torah, einam ella, all they are eitzos meirachik, counsel, advice from far, migdoil ha'etza, from he who is great of counsel, from Hashem, lesaken hadeyos uliyasher kol hamasim, to fix minds and to straighten actions. Every word here is exact. The Rebbe ties in these eitzos meirachik, migdoil ha'etza, to the sikha that I said before. It looks like he's just poetically stylistically borrowing verses, but he's communicating to us the type of reasons. The reasons of chukim are counsel from far. They're not counsel or advice that we can come to from ourselves. They can only come from Hashem himself. The Rebbe also once tied it into the two reasons, Chaimesh and Temurah. When it says Migdoil ha'etza, Gdoil ha'etza means greater counsel. I'm smart, he has greater counsel, but it's all on the same level. Eitzos meirachik means it's advice from totally far, from totally beyond me. The reason for Chaimesh is somewhat relatable. The reason for Temurah, going to the opposite extreme, becoming a liar, from sacrificing to becoming a liar, that requires Eitzes Meirachik. That's advice from so far, from transcendent God, the creator of the human being. And most of Torah is for this purpose. L'saken adeiros, to fix the mind. All problems begin because the mind is split. You have different opinions, we don't see eye to eye, or I don't know enough. I'm not learned enough. Torah is there to fix our minds, to bring our minds together, and thereby also to fix the actions in Maisa B'Poyel, in actual action. They both require fixing. B'chein hu omer, says the Rambam, and so too it says. And here, the Rebbe points to the unusual language, v'chein hu omer. Usually you say shenemar. Shenemar means as it says. V'chein hu omer means and so it says. The Rambam is alluding to the fact that he's about to bring a proof to the general concept, not to all the details that we just said. The general idea that you have to find reasons and significance in mitzvahs can be hinted to in this verse. What does it say in Mishlei? Halei kasavti lecha shalishim. I have written to you thirds. Thirds is a reference to the Torah. Has three parts, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. I've written them to you b'may eitzes v'das, with counsel and knowledge. That means the entire Torah Hashem wrote with knowledge. There's reasons contained in every single element of the Torah. And what is the reason that Hashem puts reasons there? Lo heidiacha koisht imrei emes, to let you know the truth of the words of truth. How certain and how definite and how authentic Torah is. Lahashiv amarim emes l'shelchecha, so you can always have an answer of truth to those who send forth to you challenges. One interpretation of the verse. There are many commentaries in this verse. I just gave one approach. But the point is, when someone challenges the veracity of Torah, you can show them that there's reasons in every single thing. Every single mitzvah has some element that I can find a connection to. And that allows even my general commitment, as I said before, to also be with chayas, to also be with energy, and to be fully serving Hashem with simcha, with joy and energy all the way through. Brich Rachamana Desayan, blessed is Hashem who grants us assistance. Nigmar Sefer Chi, Be'ezras Hashem, with God's help we finish the 9th book. Uminyan Prakav Shal Sefer Zeh, Arbaim V'chamisha. The number of chapters in this book is 45. Hilchos Karban Pesach, Asara Prakim, the laws of the Passover sacrifice, 10 chapters. Hilchos Chagiga, Shleisha Prakim, the laws of celebratory offerings and festivals, is 3 chapters. Hilchos Becheres, the laws of firstborn animals and the animal tithes. Shmeina Prakim had 8 chapters. Hilchos Shgagos, the laws of inadvertent transgressions and sacrifices for them. Chamisha Asar Prakim, 15 chapters. Hilchos Mechusre Kapara, Chamisha Prakim, the laws of the sacrifices for those lacking atonement, 5 chapters. Hilchos Temurah Arba Prakim, the laws of exchange, forbidden exchange, 4 chapters. Mazel Tov for concluding another book of Rambam, the 9th book.